Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, we were all set to just talk about that awesome game last night between the Suns and the Clippers, but we got some breaking news in the NBA, as we sometimes get, even though it is the playoffs, and the Boston Celtics, my Boston Celtics, have hired their next head coach. It's Ime Udoka, former Nets assistant and former Spurs assistant coach. So from the Greg Popovich coaching tree, a guy that I'm pretty familiar with because he used to play at Portland State when I was in college in Oregon. So I actually remember him playing in college a little bit. And a guy that, Sap, I correctly picked as the Celtics head coach when we did our preview of head coaching positions just about a week ago. So credit to me. And I'm glad the Celtics hired a coach of color and a coach who played in the NBA. They were sorely lacking in that department. What's your initial reaction to the hire, Sap?
I like the move because Udoka, as you said, played in the league as a journeyman, but then spent a long time coaching under Greg Popovich. It seems like every assistant under Popovich eventually gets a chance to be a head coach in the NBA. And also the connection that he had 2 years ago when Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum were playing on Team USA in the World Games, that those three players seem to connect with him. And that's the most important thing going forward. Now, I don't put Marcus Smart at the same level as Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum. I think they should be the two driving forces on this team going forward. I think the Celtics should move on from Marcus Smart. But if they're going to include all three of those players in this process, it seems like those three players gave thumbs up on Udoka. I think that it's a good move. Again, he seems to be someone who, he played in the league, albeit as a journeyman, but that pedigree of coaching under Popovich means a lot. And I think it means a lot to Brad Stevens because Brad Stevens formed a really good relationship with Popovich. I think Popovich respects Brad Stevens. So that connection obviously probably led Brad Stevens to thinking that Udoka was going to be the right guy for this job. I would have preferred Chauncey Billups or maybe Sam Cassell, but we're hearing now that Chauncey Billups is probably going to end up in Portland, and Cassell, we'll see what happens with him. But the Celtics, give them credit. They were the first team to hire a new head coach here in the offseason. And they were also the one team that made a pretty significant move last week in trading Kemba Walker for Al Horford and trying to, trade one bad contract for another bad contract. So they're moving quickly, which can be a good and a bad thing. In a sense, you could look back at that Kemba Walker move and say, well, maybe they should have waited because maybe Ben Simmons would be available for Kemba Walker, although I doubt the Philadelphia 76ers would ever trade Ben Simmons to the Boston Celtics. I think they'll move him somewhere outside of conference or to not their biggest rivals or one of their biggest rivals. So sometimes when you do things too quickly, you leave yourself short on some of the candidates. I mean, if Milwaukee implodes and Mike Budenholzer is available, maybe he's a better fit. But I think this is the right pick. And you nailed it, Jet, when you said that he was going to be the next guy. And I think it is so important to hire an African-American coach because I think that the time was right for that again for the Celtics, especially in the wake of what Kyrie Irving brought up during the postseason and the fact that Marcus Smart kind of backed Kyrie on some of those fears that Black players have in Boston. As we know, Marcus Smart less than a year ago wrote a long piece in the Players Tribune saying that he had issues in Boston. So the issues have to be real if players are experiencing that. So I think Udoka is a fine choice.
Yeah, and you saw yesterday actually that Jaylen Brown tweeted out, three
Yes.
of the four head coaches remaining in the playoffs are African American. Clearly, he thought it was time for the Celtics to have a black head coach, and I'm glad to see the mechanism of assistant coach to head coach is in place in this hire, because too often I think we've seen, and we talked about before, that somebody will just come out of the woodwork, a white guy, usually a la, Steve Nash last year, who hasn't really paid any dues in terms of, learning the coaching process, and is white, and we saw Stephen A. Smith talk about this too. So I'm glad that it's not just that it's a black head coach, but it's a black head coach who has, learned under Greg Popovich and has spent time sort of understanding what it takes to be a head coach. Has coached at the Olympic level as well. That's how he got a good relationship with Tatum and Brown and Marcus Smart. So I think that those are all good things. In terms of the negatives, I agree with you that perhaps they are moving a little too quickly. I think we accused Danny Ainge of moving far too slowly on a lot of things, and which I feel was a very fair criticism, because when you move too slowly, other teams will be able to take advantage when you are sitting on your ass doing nothing. But if you move too quickly, you don't necessarily see what all the best options are. I feel like that's maybe more applicable to the Kemba Walker trade as opposed
Hmm.
to this hire. I'm sure Udoka was probably a finalist for other jobs as well,
Hmm.
and the Celtics felt like, hey, why wait? Why give him a chance to go to another team? We know we already like the guy. Our guys on the team like the guy. We don't really have to. There's no point in waiting anymore. He fits all of our criteria. So I, I do think that with the Kemba trade, maybe they could have waited a little longer. It didn't seem like Al Horford was going to get moved anywhere in the near
No.
future, anyways. So it's that I think that trade was available, 2 months from now, should they have wanted to make it. Um, the other criticism, if you're going to have any criticism of this hire, is that Brad Stevens is the guy making the decisions, and we don't necessarily think one, long for the job, or two, right for the job. So when if you do have a new general manager come in a year or so, do they want to completely clean house and be able to pick their own head coach? Do they want to trade some of the guys who endorsed Ime Udoka as the head coach? So there's that sort of looming issue as well. It's if you think Brad Stevens should be the guy making these decisions, is he thinking I need to get a guy who coaches very similar to me? I think I was a great coach, so I want a guy who reminds me of myself. I obviously don't want that, so I'm hoping that he's kind of was able to look past the things that he likes about himself as a coach and hire things that he lacked. And Ime Udoka at least, has the pedigree of being an NBA player at least, and being a person of color that Brad Stevens obviously didn't have. So those are two things. But stylistically, he's never been a head coach, so I don't really know what he brings to the table there.
No, I think it's a wise move, and it could also be a move that Brad Stevens is trying to rebel against the way Danny Ainge did things. Ainge was very pensive, kind of like Hamlet whenever he made moves, and now Brad Stevens is acting quickly.
Yeah, especially, as Danny Ainge was longer tenured in the position. When he first came on board, granted that was, 18 years ago, he made a move almost immediately to trade Antoine Walker, who was an established star on the Celtics, and was sort of making rapid fire moves, almost like we see with Brad Stevens. This does happen when you hire a new general manager, is that they try to establish themselves quickly, right? In any sport, it's not just basketball, that they'll try to put their imprint on the team. So it's not that surprising that Brad Stevens is making all these moves. The surprising thing is that he's in a position to do it. Uh, so we'll see, if these bear fruit. But as of today, I like the hire. I think he fits the qualifications. If I'm being nitpicky, yeah, I would have preferred Chauncey Billups, because I feel like he's a little bit more cachet as a one of the best players, if not the best player, to win on a team to win a championship. He did win Finals MVP. Udoka, as you said, more of a journeyman, but at least was in the NBA for several seasons and logged over 300 games in his career. So it's not like he was just in the NBA for a cup of coffee. He did win a championship. Technically, he was on the Spurs when they won a championship in 2014, I believe, Sap. So uh, it's I like the hire a lot. I think it's the right time for this hire. I think it's a good hire. The nitpicky stuff doesn't really matter. If this is who Tatum and Brown wanted, by the way, then that automatically makes it the correct hire.
Yeah, nothing to see here. Go along with that. And they need positive publicity at this point. I think the Kemba for Al Horford trade was a positive in a sense that you are giving you some cap flexibility down the road. You're bringing in a big man, which they clearly need, someone who's a professional who appears to want to play here, where Kemba Walker wanted out. And now you've got your coach in place. So here we are. We're still in the conference finals, and the Celtics are making the moves in the offseason. They can have a press conference in a week to 10 days where they introduce their new head coach, maybe bring Al Horford in, and it's a positive for the Boston Celtics because the season did not end well.
Yeah, it was, I mean, a disaster of the season, and I think we're going to talk about probably on a later show this week the article from Jared Weiss, high school classmate of mine, actually,
Oh,
in the Athletic, about the dysfunction of the Celtics this season. Then there's a story today, separate of that story, saying the Celtics didn't even take COVID seriously, and
right.
other teams were accusing them of spreading COVID to their teams. So Brad Stevens seemingly had no control over the team. The team didn't take things seriously, even as serious as COVID. They didn't take that seriously. So yeah, they need some positive press. They need some good vibes. They need a real like a demon cleansing exorcism, whatever you want to call it. And getting a fresh face in there with a different perspective in Ime Udoka, I think it is a really good thing. Had they hired an assistant coach of Brad Stevens, that would have obviously been a disaster. At one point, Jay Larinaga was considered like the favorite for the job in Vegas just like 2 weeks ago. That would have been a freaking nightmare. So I really don't have much to say in the way of negativity for this. I think it's the right decision at the right time, and we'll see if he can coach. Based off of his pedigree, I have to believe that Greg Popovich wouldn't recommend a stiff of a head coach.
No, and I mean Popovich's assistants have had different results. Some have been good, some have been mediocre, some have been poor. Probably a little better than Bill Belichick's coaching tree, but you get the point that when you're the best coach in the NBA for a 20-year period, like Popovich has been, people want to poach your assistant coaches the same way in the NFL teams wanted to poach Bill Belichick's assistants, and you just see some guys are great assistants who don't make it as head coaches. But I'm positive about what he's going to bring. And again, Tatum and Brown are on board. That's the most important thing, so they can move forward.
Yeah, I agree. And also Smart played under him too and is on board, which there's the story again. We're going to talk about a little bit later in the week in the Athletic that Smart was favored too much by Brad Stevens, and the players didn't like that. So I guess could there potentially be some blowback from this? Is Smart going to be on the team long term? I pains me to say this, Sep, and I said it at the end of the season. I think it's kind of time for a change of
Mhm.
scenery. So I hope that this doesn't get in the way of a potential move of the roster to improve the roster should a Marcus Smart trade materialize that would help the team. I'm not saying it will, but I think that if there's already a perception that the players have that Brad Stevens is showing favoritism towards Marcus Smart, perhaps this won't necessarily help that perception. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
no, I mean, we're just going to have to find out as we progress.
yeah. So, anyways, that we'll talk more about this, especially in the offseason and as other teams hire head coaches and see where the chips fall for that. But in the meantime, the Celtics do have a new head coach, Ime Udoka, and a name that I'm sure many members of the media will get completely wrong until that they are they're bullied into correcting it on social media. But Sap, there was a game last night, and it was a hell of a basketball game. Though the finish took an incredibly long time, which we'll talk about in a second. The Suns ended up winning 104-103. Sap, credit to you. You correctly threaded the needle of your bet last night. You didn't actually formally make the bet, but you predicted it. You said the Suns are going to win, but you would take the Clippers with the points because it was that close. I think the spread was 4.5,
Mhm.
and it ended up being 1 point game. So good job by you, Sap. And it came down to a alley oop with 0.9 seconds left, completed by your new favorite player, DeAndre Ayton. Um, and the Suns go up 2 games to nothing in this series. I will say this, Sap. I wasn't 100% correct about why the Clippers would lose last night. I said it was going to be because Paul George had a crap game, but he did blow the game for them by missing 2 free throws at the end of the game. So part of me was right.
Yeah, he crapped his pants at the end of the game, which is unfortunate for Paul George because the prior 2.5 minutes, he was brilliant. He scored 9 points, which turned a deficit into a lead for the Clippers. He hit a three, hit a mid range, hit a drive, hit 2 free throws. He looked like the best player on the court down the stretch. Then he gets an opportunity to increase the lead from 1 to 3 with 9 seconds left, and he clanks both free throws. And then that led to another review of another play, which took forever. Jet, the last 90 seconds of play in that game took 33 minutes in real time. I mean, if you base that over a whole game, the game would take 12 hours to play, that we'd be watching basketball. A normal game would take 12 to 16 hours to play if it was
So
at that
typical
pace.
baseball game.
Felt like a baseball game at some point. There were actually more reviews in the final 90 seconds than field goals made. There were 5 reviews in the final 90 seconds, only 4 field goals made over the final 90 seconds. And again, there's certain plays that I just don't think you should go back and review. There was one early in the game where Devin Booker was driving to the basket. They didn't blow a whistle or anything. They just stopped play and started reviewing it and called an offensive foul on Devin Booker. There was no call on the floor. The play where Devin Booker's along the sideline and Patrick Beverly clearly knocks it out of bounds. But if you look on replay, it may have caught Devin Booker's pinky finger last, which is going to happen in that situation. That's just kind of the way the world works. I mean, it's not as if Devin Booker is going to let Patrick Beverly touch the ball and then pull his hand back like he's putting it on a stove. Players don't move that quickly. And again, slow motion is great, but that's not how the game is played. I thought that was a poor call. I know a lot of the Clippers fans are saying that Mikal Bridges' 3-point attempt, which went out of bounds, may have been deflected out of bounds by DeAndre Ayton, and that would have given the Clippers ball to the ball.
Skip Bayless is apoplectic about that.
Which I don't know where he's seeing any replay, because we didn't see any other angle. He's just saying, well, DeAndre Ayton's 7 foot and the Clippers player is 6'4", so in theory it must have gone off at Ayton.
No,
which
he's
is ridiculous.
sounding like Donald Trump saying like stop
yeah.
the steal, and he's planning rally. Is that?
or he's got a view of it that none of us had. So okay, so now 9/10 of a second left. The Suns have one last chance, and it was a beautifully diagrammed play. But Phoenix didn't have any timeouts, but they were able to diagram a play because it was under review. Prior to that, they may have to change that rule, Jed. If there's a review going on and a team doesn't have any timeouts left, you may have to have the players away from the bench, bring the trainer, the equipment staff out to give them water or whatever the case may be, but they can't have contact with the coach. That isn't fair. And again, I'm rooting for Phoenix. So, I mean, that worked out fine for me, but it's really not fair that you have no timeouts left, but because of the review, you can now diagram a play, which was a sweet play. Jay Crowder to DeAndre Ayton, set up by a beautiful back screen by Devin Booker. Just an exquisite play. DeMarcus Cousins, who was guarding the inbounds pass, did not have a really good angle on it, which allowed Crowder to make a pass that, look, Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady would have been proud of, because Ayton just went up and dunked the ball. And most people were screaming, oh, goaltending. Well, you can't have goaltending on a pass from out of bounds because it's a pass. It's not a shot. But they still had 0.7 of a second left. And that took 10 minutes to figure out who was on the court at the time of that basket, because you can't change anybody on the court because it's a review.
It was a made basket. It was
a made basket.
Treat it exactly as it is. It was a made basket. But both teams were trying to pull a fast one for
they were trying to put Cousins had to stay on the floor because he was on the floor. You had to keep Zubac on the floor because he was on the floor. Why didn't they just go to, like I did, go to ESPN.com, because coming out of timeouts, they will let you know who's on the court for each team, and just do it that way. Instead, they had to go through the video like it was the Zapruder film and say, aha, that's Zubac.
No, they're like, let's go back 5 minutes, watch the last 5 minutes, figure out who's on the court.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, it was just interminable. It was a 3-hour game. It was a wonderful game. The team I'm rooting for won. It was nice. And you saw players step up at the big moment. You had the classic, hero GOAT thing where Paul George is the GOAT, missing 2 free throws. DeAndre Ayton, I thought, was sensational last night. Crowder, who didn't score any field goals, but made a really nice pass. And Devin Booker continues to show that he's a tough kid. He's playing with a broken nose, which, Patrick Beverly kind of headbutted him. I don't think it was a dirty play, but Patrick Beverly has a tendency of injuring guys on the court because of the way he plays. And Booker still hung in there with a broken nose and then set a beautiful back pick, which led to DeAndre Ayton's, winning basket. So it was a fun game. And look, the ESPN crew was sensational last night. Mike Breen, Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, they were right on top of everything, as they usually are. That's a great broadcast team. It was a fun product, except that the final 90 seconds took 33 minutes.
Yeah, it was a very fun game. And like you said, there was a lot of exciting moments down the stretch, a lot of narratives, the Paul George thing, DeAndre Ayton obviously coming into his own as a star level player in the NBA. So plenty of storylines. Skip Bayless making things up. But as you said, it's not it's not good for the product for it to be taking that long. Listen, I don't think people ended up tuning out because it was such a
No.
tight game to end the stretch. And but I just think a lot of people were complaining. Even Rob Gronkowski, for some reason, got in on the mix and on Twitter saying, this is bad for the sport. How the NBA shouldn't allow this. But my question to you, Sap, and to everybody is, okay, well, how do we fix this now? I've come up with my solution for replay saying, you have 45 seconds. If you can't figure it out, the call on the court stands, which I maintain is probably the best solution. As far as the one on the sideline goes, where Beverly swiped it and it went off, like you said, like a skin cell of Devin Booker. I hate that. You can overturn what the call on the court is there because of that. But I also don't really know what you can do about it in that situation. I know, like, the intent obviously was for Beverly to swipe the ball away.
Right.
But it's hard. It's subjective to referee intent, right? So
it is.
I just don't know what you do about that other than, again, try to make the replay take less time, but that doesn't really get to the core of it, which is it should still have been the Suns' ball.
The issue with that is if Beverly swipes the ball as he did, and the ball's going out of bounds, and Booker tries to make an attempt at it and touches it before it goes out of bounds, then it should be Clippers' ball. Or if Beverly swipes the ball and it goes off, say, the foot of Devin Booker, goes out of bounds, it should still be Clippers' ball, right? So, but in that situation, it's swiped, and as if you show it in super slow replay, you'll see that it may have touched Booker's pinky finger before it went out of bounds last. That to me is similar in baseball when you see a runner steal second base, he's called safe, they have a replay, he clearly beat the throw to the bag, he's safe, but now they call him out on replay because as he popped up, his cleat came off the bag by a 16th of an inch, and the infielder kept his glove on that foot, and now he's out. Technically, he's out, yeah, but you're asking a player to pop up, slide, and keep his foot on the bag. So now you're going to have baseball players maybe breaking their ankle because they have to be on the bag the whole time. I mean, there's the letter of the law, there's the spirit of the law, and it just, some of these calls were very maddening. And again, I like your idea of if you can't solve it within 45 seconds, let's move on, go back to the original call. You can't go to jump balls because the league can't even execute those. The referees cannot execute a jump ball and the players can't execute a jump ball. Do you have alternating possessions at some point like they do in college?
Maybe.
Okay, that call is, we're going to give the ball to the Clippers because it's their chance, any kind of like 50-50 play that they can't determine on replay. Okay, now the arrow's pointing for the Clippers, give it to them, the next one goes to Phoenix. I don't know. And again, in basketball, you couldn't do this for 48 minutes because, like I said, the game would take 12 to 16 hours because there's similar plays that happen in the second quarter that no one pays attention to.
Well, I mean, now what you have, Sap, is literally every out of bounds play. All the players are sticking their hands up in the air, twiddling their fingers, saying, review it. So, once somebody's calling for it, they're going to do it because they have the mechanism and they don't want to look. The referees don't want to look, foolish. But yeah, I think some of the stuff is just it's too hard. I hate that rule, as I said, where they're saying, okay, well, technically it went off, his pinky finger, but I don't know how you can legislate it out because it ultimately becomes subjective. I think the best you can do is try to limit the amount of time replays take. And I don't know why no sport has yet to experiment with that, with saying, okay, we have a shot clock on how long the replays take. Is it because the referees pushed back on it and the officials unions don't like that and said, we want to make sure we get the right call. We don't want to be called out for screwing something up. I don't know, but it's obviously you don't want the end of the game to take that long. As you mentioned too, Sep, you definitely can't have a team get a free timeout and chance to diagram a play out of that if they don't have one. Even if they do have one, they still shouldn't get a free time. You could offer them, say, if you want to have them huddle up, you have to burn your timeout here.
If they still have a timeout, sure.
Yeah, if they still have one left.
Timeout, you can't just give them one and say, look.
No, it's not fair.
No,
but also, what's to prevent the coach from screaming from the sideline while the player's at the other end of the court?
Yeah.
There's really
Or giving the
it's
instructions to an equipment manager or a trainer who's going to go out in the court and make sure the guys are
right.
hydrated. So yeah,
But I mean, I guess you could do better than what it is, which is what it was, which was letting them basically act like it was
yep.
a longer than usual timeout. So yeah, there's some things the NBA needs to look at. I do really firmly believe that it should start with limiting the amount of time you have for a review, and I don't think any fan would have a problem with that. Saying they can't figure it out in 45 seconds, then the call on the floor
Right.
stands. I think that's fair. That's reasonable. We have so many great angles. So if you can't figure it out in 45 seconds, I think that's a reasonable enough amount of time to be able to figure out if the call was incorrect.
Yep.
So I would hope that not just the NBA, but the NHL and the MLB and the NFL all would adopt something similar, because all their reviews take too long, frankly. The NBA's, it's a little different because the game is so fast paced and the flow gets completely disrupted.
Mhm.
There's natural stops in the NFL, so that and the MLB, so that sort of it's a little different. But I do think, in general, replays take far too long, and it didn't mar this game, but it's certainly a talking point at the end of the game.
Yeah, it maybe drops Paul George clanking through 2 free throws at the end down to the third most talked about subject when it should be the most talked about subject, because if he nails those 2 free throws, and by the way, Paul George is an 85% free throw shooter in his career, so he should make those free throws. They would have had a 3 point lead, and that kind of changes the whole dynamic of the end of that game anyway. But because he missed both, the Suns only trail by one, and that beautiful pass from Crowder to Ayton with the help of that back screen from Devin Booker, that was the difference in the game. And now the Suns are up 2 games to none, and they've got Paul coming back on Thursday in theory. Still, that hasn't been announced, but most people think he'll be back on the court on Thursday, Game 3 in LA. Meanwhile, Kawhi Leonard, I doubt we're going to see in this series, or even if the Clippers somehow come back from a 2-0 deficit for the third straight time, even if they make it to the finals, I don't think you're going to see Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned DeAndre Ayton, Sap, because you wanted to talk about
Yeah.
him, who was obviously he was the story of the game, probably the best player on the court last night.
Yeah, he was.
Considering Paul George again clanked those 2 free throws. Ayton put up 24 points, 14 rebounds. He's been fantastic on the boards all postseason long. He's had a really good postseason. I mean, Devin Booker,
Yeah.
Chris Paul are obviously the most talked about guys on that team, but Ayton as the third guy has been terrific. And you, Sap, shocked me with a text message last night that I didn't respond to because I wanted to talk about it on the show today instead. Said, long term, you take DeAndre Ayton over Joel Embiid. Explain yourself, Sap.
Well, first of all, there's a 4-year age difference, right? Embiid's 27 and Ayton is about to turn 23. So there's 4 years difference in age. Ayton has really no injury concerns. Embiid has a ton of injury concerns. I worry about Embiid's conditioning. I don't worry about that for DeAndre Ayton. We saw last night, he got up off the ground over everybody to dunk that basketball to win the game for Phoenix. I mean, I would think Joel Embiid probably wouldn't have the energy to pull that off at the end of the game, or he may be looking to nail a 3-pointer. I don't like the way Joel Embiid acted after the Game 7 loss to the Atlanta Hawks, throwing Ben Simmons under the bus. That's not what you do as a leader of a team. I also don't like the fact that in that series against Atlanta, in 7 games in the 7 fourth quarters of that series, he was 14 of 56 from the floor. That's 25% with a dozen turnovers. You can extrapolate that's really 12 of 68, which is not efficient at all. It's a disaster. I mean, Ben Simmons was at that level. So you had 2 guys who essentially sucked in the fourth quarter in every one of those games. Now we hear Embiid, I want to play guard. He seems to be a lot to handle. Look, as someone who follows the league and loves the league, he's wildly entertaining. His ceiling is higher than DeAndre Ayton's, but I think going forward, you can count on DeAndre Ayton being a guy who's going to play 70, 75 games a year, give you 18 to 20 points, 10, 11 rebounds, and fit in with a squad. Like, I think he's taken the leadership of Chris Paul to heart, as has Devin Booker. So I think going forward, based on the fact that Ayton is 4 years younger, healthier, seems to be more focused and embraces, I don't know, being a center more than Joel Embiid does, I think going forward, I would take DeAndre Ayton. I don't think his ceiling's as high as Embiid, but I could see Embiid in 3 years having another catastrophic injury, gaining weight, and doing something else. Whereas I think DeAndre Ayton is a basketball player that's focused on doing that.
Yeah, I liked Aiton a lot coming out of the draft, and obviously, I think this was a perfect situation for him in that he grew up in Phoenix. He went to
Hmm.
college at Arizona, and he got drafted by the Suns. So, I mean,
Yeah.
he's very familiar with the team and the organization, and so a very comfortable landing spot for him. And I also like that it shows that the center position is not going extinct. You can
Hmm.
be effective as a center if you play within the team construct, and to his credit, Sap, has taken a far lesser role this
Hmm.
year than he did in the past 2 seasons. He's averaging this year the lowest amount of field goal attempts in his career and the lowest amount of points per game in his career. The rebounds are basically identical, but he's taking a step back because Chris Paul's on the team, and he realized,
Right.
hey, this is better for the team. I don't need to try to do as much. But when Chris Paul is out in this series, he's stepped up and has the ability to do it. So I think he's certainly proved that he's a really good teammate. Now, again, he's to me the difference is, and why I'm going to disagree with you is he's never been the best player on this team. Even when
No.
since he's been there, Devin Booker's been the best player on the team, and now he's the third best player on the team with Chris Paul there as well. And so Joel Embiid has shown that he can be, the best player on a team, no problem.
What, that loses in the second round of the playoffs?
Oh, okay, yeah, but he's still the best player on the team, and they did get to the
So's Jason
playoffs.
Tatum. So's Jason Tatum.
Well,
I mean,
Jason
I'm
Tatum's
not
been to
taking.
the conference finals 3 times.
Right, and I think we're going to see DeAndre Ayton playing in the finals. And my,
Maybe
my only point with I think if you look at the two players, I'm trusting DeAndre Ayton going forward more than Joel Embiid. If we have this conversation in 3 years, would you be shocked if Joel Embiid's 340 pounds and playing half the season and doing other things? Look, I love the guy. The personality is through the roof. He's fantastic. But when he's talking about now, I want to be a guard. Like, no, you're 7'1", 280. You're a center. You should be the most dominant guy in the league, and at times he is. But his conditioning is still an issue, Jet, and we saw that in the fourth quarter of every game in that Atlantic series.
No,
He can't
I
finish it.
agree. His conditioning is definitely an issue, and the injuries are concerned too. But as talented as I think DeAndre Ayton is, and I think he's quite talented, Joel Embiid, I still feel like is miles
Oh,
away from him in terms of
well,
talent. So I'll
yeah,
take the guy with that extreme level of talent.
who shows no leadership ability, though, in terms of throwing his own player under the bus. And we know that he and Ben Simmons don't like each other. I'm sure Ben Simmons would throw him under the bus if he
Yeah,
had the
that's why I'm
opportunity.
curious to see what happens with Philadelphia
Right.
because if they get somebody who fits Embiid's game better, maybe we'll see a different Joel Embiid and a different Philadelphia 76ers. Again, and I've said this, and I'm not a big Ben Simmons guy except for defensively. I think he's probably the most frustrating player in the league to play with because you see all the talent and
Mhm.
you see that he's in some ways regressed.
Yeah.
Part of me can't blame Joel Embiid, who seems like he is a very competitive guy and having this complete like blob of non-competitiveness as his running mate. I don't give him a full pass, but I the ceiling of him continues to just be so high. And DeAndre Ayton's a really good player, a nice player. I think he'll make the All-Star game a couple of times. Joel Embiid was was a couple of healthy games away from being the MVP of the league
Oh,
this year.
I'm not disputing who's more talented. I am saying that Joel Embiid is going into his 8th year next year, and every year it seems to be the same thing. He doesn't have much in the tank at the end of the season. His conditioning is an issue, lack of leadership, maybe lack of focus at times. I mean, in the final game against Atlanta, he fell in love with playing out in the perimeter. He's a big man with great low post moves, get down there and dominate. I just think, too, that Phoenix is constructed like an old school team. And I think that's why a lot of people have embraced them, myself included. They have a point guard in Chris Paul, an old school point guard, right? There's no question that he is the floor general on that team. You've got Devin Booker, who is a classic two guard. You've got DeAndre Ayton, who's a classic center. And then you've got your wings with Bridges and Crowder. And even someone like Campaign, who was sensational last night. He may have been the best player on Phoenix with 29 points and 9 assists, comes in and runs the team the way Chris Paul would have run it. Maybe not as efficiently, but still at a very high level. They're kind of constructed like an old school team, whereas now you see positionless basketball, centers taking threes, these types of things. And look, I embrace all of that because I think the league right now has got more talent in it than it's ever had. I just looked at Embiid, how he finished up against Atlanta, and he alone should have been able to win that series, and he sucked in the fourth quarter of those 7 games against the Atlanta Hawks, and I got to hold that against him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that they certainly should have beaten Atlanta, and as the best player on the team, obviously the onus ultimately falls on you, and we can blame Ben Simmons all we want, which I think is fair, but there still deserves to be blame on Joel Embiid.
Yep.
Certainly, I just look at it, if Joel Embiid had Devin Booker and Chris Paul, I would say Devin
Oh,
Booker or Chris Paul on the team instead of Ben Simmons.
sure.
They'd very likely be in the conversation for the finals
Yep.
right now instead of sitting home. So DeAndre Ayton is in a position to have these accolades heaped on him because they've put him in a great spot for him where he's, the third guy on this team and he doesn't have as much pressure and he can play more within himself. I think part of Joel Embiid's problem is he has such a huge scoring burden put on him that he's trying to do all these things that he doesn't have to or shouldn't do because of the deficiencies of Ben Simmons' game. And prior to this season, which I think Philadelphia is pretty well constructed, they were constructed really poorly.
Hmm. And the thing too about Joel Embiid, he's like the quarterback that has like endless ability, can throw every pass, can do everything necessary to be a dominant quarterback. And sometimes that's not a great thing because now you overthink things or you think you could do anything on the court and you don't focus on what you're really good at. DeAndre Ayton is a quarterback who, maybe has his limitations, but knows how to check down for the short pass or throw the ball away, not turn the ball over as much. So again, I think we all agree. I think DeAndre Ayton would agree with us that Embiid's ceiling is higher than any other center in basketballs. I mean, when Shaq O'Neal says that this guy's more talented than me, that means a lot because Shaq throws compliments around like manhole covers. So there's no question about that. But I have to question some of the makeup and the focus or lack thereof focus with Joel Embiid. Whereas this kid, and again, you're 100% right. He's gotten to play with Chris Paul, who I think is a sensational leader, great point guard, and Devin Booker, who again I'm developing a man crush on him, is someone who has the DNA of a winner. I mean, you look at Devin Booker and Ben Simmons, you see two totally different dudes, right? I mean, the kid was playing with a broken nose last night. He had an off night shooting, yet he was still playing tough defense, setting picks when necessary. Did that a lot throughout the game, not just on the game winning basket. I don't know if Ben Simmons has that in him. And it's kind of interesting
Now,
because they both have dated Kendall Jenner. I don't know, maybe
yes,
Kendall Jenner flipped from the guy who was not a great teammate and not willing to step up to a guy who was clearly the man in Devin Booker.
yeah, that seems to be the case. But dating a Kardashian has not proven to be successful for NBA players in the past. So if I'm Devin
Tristan
Booker, I don't know.
Thompson, Tristan Thompson won a title, I think, while dating one of the
Well, cheating
Kardashians, or
on one
maybe it
of the
was later.
Kardashians.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Tristan Thompson seems to be very sexually active. I guess
Yes,
good for him. Except he was part of the issue with that. The guy was out for like a month with COVID, right? I mean,
yeah.
he
I wonder
didn't
how
play
he
for a
got
month.
that. I don't
Yeah, and
have
it
any
just
sources on it, but
no,
I
but
could guess.
yeah, 2 + 2 = 4, where I come from. But no, interesting game. Is the series over? Probably, but we'll see what
Unless
happens. Chris
Kawhi makes
Paul
a
comes back.
miraculous
Yeah,
recovery.
right. And Paul George just goes nuts and actually hits his free throws at the end of games. I mean, Reggie Jackson's playing at a very high level. Beverly's playing at a high level. They're getting those other players to step up. They're just somewhat depleted when they don't have their best player. And Phoenix, although they don't have their best player, they've been able to cobble it together because Booker, I think, again, before Chris Paul got there, had to play some of point guard, in his first few years. So he's used to distributing to his teammates, and he did a nice job of that last night. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the series moves to LA.
That 2018 draft is just continuing to look better and better, right? I mean,
Yeah.
between Doncic and Trae Young, you got and Ayton was the top pick, so you have Ayton and
Yep.
Trae Young still in the thing, competing for a title. Uh, so three guys at the very top of the draft who are really good. Jaren Jackson Jr., I think we both think is going to be a good player. Colin Sexton's already a good player. Bridges on Phoenix is a guy who, again, is in this. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Michael Porter Jr., some really good players out of this draft. I think it's going to be a very highly regarded draft, if we look, 10 years in the future and say, wow, A lot of talent in that draft. I think I may have lost you, Sap. Sap, do I still have you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, you're yeah, I got you. I got you. So
Okay.
anyway,
Okay.
we'll move on from that Phoenix game because before that was the actual NBA draft lottery with all these, suck teams who aren't competing anymore. And the Detroit Pistons ended up coming out on top. They get the first pick and probably the rights to a presumptive top pick, Cade Cunningham. The rest of the order goes as follows. I'll just do the top 10, Sap. Detroit, Houston with number 2, the Cavaliers with number 3, the Raptors with 4. Both Cleveland and Toronto beat the odds to get top 4 picks. The Magic have number 5, the Thunder 6, the Warriors get Minnesota's pick at number 7, the Magic get Chicago's pick at number 8, the Kings have 9, and the Pelicans have 10. Sap, Detroit desperately needs some star player, so this was a pretty good day for them.
Yeah, getting Cade Cunningham will be good. And I don't know exactly how good Cade Cunningham is going to be. I think he could be a 20 points per game scorer with 6 or 7 rebounds, 6 or 7 assists. I know a lot of people came out and said maybe another Grant Hill, which would be really nice. Grant Hill, of course, played early in his career with the Pistons, was a multiple-time All-Star. So that would be a good comp and a good building block for the Detroit Pistons. Houston, which had the worst team in basketball, ends up with the second pick. And I think Evan Mobley, the center/forward from USC, who's compared somewhat to Chris Bosh,
He
would be a
reminds me
nice
so
addition.
much of Chris Bosh.
He
They have
really
like the
does.
same body type. It's
Yeah,
crazy. They
it
look almost
really is.
identical in terms of their game.
Yeah, that's like even when I'm watching the Phoenix series and everybody's comparing Devin Booker to Kobe Bryant, I keep thinking of Ray Allen. Their
Right, I
movements. I
agree.
mean, Devin Booker's not as good a deep shooter as Ray Allen, but their movements are like eerily similar. And then after that, maybe the two Jalen's go next: Jalen Green, Jalen Suggs. I'm hoping Jalen Suggs goes to Toronto. To hook up with Masai Ujiri and that really good organization, and maybe he could be their point guard of the future. Jalen Green is a player I think a lot of people think that if he really reaches his potential, can be a star in the league. And then you go from there to see what happens. It was interesting to see Golden State has the 7th and 14th pick. What exactly they do with that? Do they try to move those to get a player? But then there's those salary cap restrictions that they have. Obviously, I think Ben Simmons would fit perfectly with Golden State because he'd be surrounded by great shooters. Although there's a bit of duplicity there with Ben Simmons and Draymond Green, and I would think that by the 4th game of the year, Draymond Green would probably choke Ben Simmons at some point,
Yes.
right? I mean, that would clearly happen because they have similar games, except Draymond Green bust his ass and Ben Simmons looked like he doesn't give a fuck.
And I don't know that Philadelphia wants draft capital in return for Ben Simmons.
Yeah, they want someone. I mean, could it be Andrew Wiggins from Golden State? Andrew Wiggins, Kelly Oubre still there.
Talk about another guy who doesn't look like he cares all that
Oh
much.
man,
Andrew
yeah,
Wiggins.
I know. You couldn't get those two guys to fog up glass. I mean, Ben
Though
Simmons and Andrew Wiggins.
he did play college ball with Joel Embiid, so maybe there's some
That could
sort
be
of relationship
something.
there.
Yeah, so you could have something along those lines. But yeah, what can Golden State do with the 7th and 14th pick? And it's going to be interesting. It appears to be a pretty deep draft, not as top heavy as some other drafts, but Cade Cunningham appears to be the no-brainer, and he'll be playing for the Pistons in the future. And they needed someone. They haven't had the first pick in the draft since 1970 when they selected Bob Lanier out of St. Bonaventure.
And they haven't had like an actual like star player since maybe Grant Hill.
I'd say Grant Hill, because even the championship team didn't
those
have
weren't
a star player.
stars.
No, I mean Rasheed Wallace was probably technically their best player. He's not a Hall of Famer. Ben Wallace just got in the Hall of Fame based on the fact that he was a great defensive player, and you have to put someone in from a championship team. Billups, outstanding player we both like a lot, but they didn't have any star players. They haven't had someone that you could look at and say, the Pistons are coming to town tonight. Let's go to TD Garden to watch them play because I want to see their best player. It's been a long time. I think you're right, Jet. Go back to Grant Hill, who played there 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's a great basketball market too.
Yeah.
So it's good. I'm happy for they're I guess traditional rivals of the Celtics, but it's not like they've been relevant for a long time. And so I'm happy for the city to be able to have a guy who I think most people think is going to end up being a star player, and I like him a lot in Cade Cunningham. It'll be really good to revitalize basketball there when they're good. the fans really rally behind them, and it
Yep.
gets raucous. They don't play at the Palace anymore. I
Nope.
think Ron Artest shut that place down.
He did.
Um, and so good for Detroit to be able to start to rebuild something, because it has been pretty bare bones there recently. So uh, it's good for the Pistons, good for the league. The league is better when they have a good Pistons team, I think, because they're a team that historically has been pretty damn good, and they've been irrelevant for
Yeah.
a while now. Houston obviously needs some influx of talent. They were in danger of losing their pick. Fortunately for them, they get to keep it. I mean, anything will help there. They're awful. Cleveland is seemingly in this position, it seems like, every year. What do they do? I know that, like you said, the G League guys are both guards. Jalen Suggs, a guard. They spent high draft capital the past couple of years on Colin Sexton and Darius Garland, who are both guards. So maybe they want to trade out of that pick, Sap. Maybe they can use it to help unload the Kevin Love contract. I mean, you
Could
need to
be.
get something still pretty good in return for the third pick, but I don't know that you can build a team with only guards and hope to be successful in the NBA. So I don't know that that's a great position for the Cavs to necessarily be in, but uh, I, I think that that's a possibility that they move that pick. Toronto, we talked about them the other day, Sap. I think this is really good for them to be selecting potentially elite level talent and have them under contract control, because it's a hard place to acquire free agents because it's in Canada. And they are a very well scouted organization. So I'm sure that they will make the most of that pick.
Yeah, they're never selecting this high. So Masai Ujiri and the staff will be like, what do we do here? We've got a very, very, very high pick. They're normally drafting in the 20s, and they're able to find players like Pascal Siakam, I believe at 27 or 28 a few years ago. So they nailed that one. But
Van
I would
Vliet
like to see
was undrafted, right?
undrafted. Yeah, I mean, they're similar to the Spurs in that they can draft players, develop them, just get the most out of those players. They're well coached. The organization is well run. I'd like to see Jalen Suggs go there. I think that would be a good place for him, and I think he could grow playing for Toronto. And again, Toronto, you hope next year will be playing back in Toronto, not playing in Tampa, so they should be back as a somewhat of a contending team. We'll see what happens with uh, Kyle
Kyle Lowry.
Kyle Lowry if he signs elsewhere, which I think he's going to probably go somewhere where he thinks he can win another championship and be a missing piece. He could be a really nice fit. I mean, I wish that the Celtics had the opportunity to sign him, but I don't know if the numbers would work or what the situation would be, because I think he'd
No,
be
they
a
want Evan
perfect fit.
Fournier for some odd
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. I
That's
give
who
me
they want.
man, imagine Kyle Lowry on that squad. I think that would be pretty good, because I think that Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown would follow his lead. It could have a similar feel of how Chris Paul was in Phoenix, because
I agree.
Kyle Lowry can take that championship ring and shove it in their face and say, I won this and I should have been the Finals MVP. Maybe he won't say that, but I will. Yeah, he'd be a really nice fit, but I can't see how that works.
No, I mean, I think they perhaps would have the money to do it, but the age doesn't line up with Tatum and Brown. They seem infatuated with Fournier for some bizarre reason. I
But
mean, I would take Kyle Lowry on 1 foot over Evan Fournier, but
Well, do it, but
that's
do it.
just me.
I get turned off with and people say this all the time. Well, you want to be on pace with Tatum and Brown. Screw that, because you have to look at the
Yeah,
NBA now. The windows aren't open that long. Like, you just go do it for now. Like, that theory didn't work for Danny Ainge, who didn't want to trade for Kawhi Leonard or Anthony Davis or anybody else, because we got to hold on to these draft picks and we got to build on this guy. And now you're depleted roster. So yeah, if you could get Kyle Lowry for 2 years, hell, he's a better player than Kemba Walker, who, when he signed
yep.
here 2 years ago, he's a more versatile player, better defender, and definitely a leader. I can guarantee you that guy would, not be afraid to be in the face of Tatum and Brown and Marcus Smart and say, I'm the veteran here. I have the winning DNA. Let's go get this done.
Yeah, I would love him on the Celtics. I think he'd be a great fit.
Yeah.
But I don't know what direction Brad Stevens plans on taking this
Yeah.
team. Sap, those are the lottery results, and let's quickly just get into this game tonight. In Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Bucks and the Hawks. It's a fascinating series, because I think the Bucks were looking ahead to this all year long and saying, Philly, 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 and now they have an opponent that they were not expecting to play in the Atlanta Hawks. The Bucks are favored by a big line tonight, 8 points at home. What do you think about this one tonight, Sap?
I think it's a bad matchup for Atlanta because you do have good perimeter defenders on Milwaukee that I could think will make Trae Young have to work his butt off to be productive. Towards the end of that series against Philadelphia, we saw Ben Simmons, I thought, did a good job against Trae Young defensively. Drew Holiday is an outstanding defender, not as big as Ben Simmons, but still pretty darn good. I think he can match up and cause some problems for Trae Young. I don't see how Atlanta contains Giannis. Clint Capella's, you know, he's a decent rim protector, rebounder, athletic guy, but Giannis should be able to score at will on him. John Collins may get some of the duties to try to combat Giannis. And Chris Middleton, I think, is going to be playing with a lot of confidence because he was a big reason why Milwaukee was able to win that series over the Brooklyn Nets. I think it sets up well for Milwaukee to win the series, although I respect the hell out of Atlanta. I see it going 6 games. The first game's always that feeling out process. The line seems a bit high, 8.5 points, which leads me to believe that Milwaukee's going to blow them out. I mean, Milwaukee's had an extra day rest than Atlanta. Both teams should be well rested coming into this, even though they needed to go 7 games to get to this point. But the way the schedule worked out is the Eastern Conference Final doesn't start on a Wednesday while we've already played 2 games in the West. So I think both teams will be ready to go, but I give the edge to Milwaukee in the series, and I think they'll take care of business tonight, probably by 12 to 15 points.
Yeah, I'll take Milwaukee as well tonight. I agree with you that the spread does seem high, and I kind of feel like if Atlanta was to take a game in Milwaukee in this series, this would be the game. As you
Mhm.
said, game one's usually a filling out process. I just feel like Milwaukee got such a big monkey off of their back in
Yeah.
beating Brooklyn and winning that game seven in overtime, and that they can kind of play a little bit looser because I do feel like at times they were playing tight against Brooklyn. I will say that Atlanta, if they have a chance of winning this series or this game, they have to hit their threes at a very high rate, which they're capable of doing. They have Trae Young, who we both think is one of the best shooters in the league, if not the second best shooter in the league. Obviously, Steph Curry keeps that mantle forever, basically. Um, and I think they have to try to run the hell out of the Bucks. And the Bucks are a good
Yeah.
running team, but they're older, and so
Mhm.
the young legs of Atlanta, you hope can maybe try to out outrun the Bucks and make it difficult for them. Use their athleticism. They're more athletic than Milwaukee, so that's how I see Atlanta competing in this series. If they hit their threes and really maintain an effort to run the hell out of the ball. As great of shape as we see that Giannis is in, and he's in phenomenal shape, we did see him huffing and puffing at the end of that game, game seven. So
Yeah.
because he has to do so much, and he has to work hard for his baskets because he's driving full speed to the rim. So I feel like if you can run him and make him work a lot defensively, you can maybe make him a little tired at the end of the game. But Atlanta has to play pretty perfect of a series in order to beat Milwaukee. And I'll take Milwaukee with the 8 points tonight, thinking that they'll play a lot looser and they're at home. Atlanta might be a little overwhelmed, but I do think Atlanta can possibly win this series. I just think that they're heavy underdogs.
Yeah, I mean, I say 6 games, and I would normally say 5, but I'll say 6 because I think Atlanta's so competitive, so well coached, so tuned in right now that they're not going to give up. I mean, they could be down 3 games to 1 and go back into Milwaukee and steal game 5 and then maybe lose it at home in game 6. So that's a real possibility. Giannis, I think part of the fatigue from game 7 was nerves. I mean, there's so much on him right now as you look at the final 4 teams left. He's facing the most pressure. I mean, it's opened up for him to win a championship. This is a 2-time MVP. It's there for him. I mean, obviously Chris Paul as well, because he's really at the end of his career if he's got that opportunity to win a championship. Atlanta's playing with house money. If they get bounced in this series in 4 or 5 games, no one's going to say anything. They're going to say, what an incredible turnaround for Atlanta. Nate McMillan deserved coach of the year, and let's get him an extension and get all these really good young players. Their future will look bright. The pressure's on Milwaukee to win because now it's opened up without Philadelphia or now Brooklyn not involved because of the Bucks beating them. it's open for Milwaukee. I mean, this is
And
Milwaukee's
and
championship
Lakers
to
being
win.
bounced in the first round, Sap, and no Kawhi
Yeah,
Leonard for the Clippers. I mean, it
right.
has opened up
Yeah,
very well for the Bucks, just as it's opened up very well for the Suns. We talked about this
yeah,
yesterday. These are the two
yeah.
teams that have caught the most breaks so far.
Absolutely. And I keep thinking back that if the Lakers had been healthy, they probably would have gone on and won another championship, because I think if Anthony Davis doesn't get hurt in the first round, they beat Phoenix. They would have handled Denver. I think they would have handled the Clippers and probably beat whoever represented the East, because I don't know if Giannis would be ready to go mano a mano against LeBron in a big series and beat him. Maybe he would. Uh, so a lot of teams right now are looking and saying, damn, we had a real opportunity to maybe win the title. I'm sure the Clippers are looking at that right now and saying, geez, it's so unfortunate that Kawhi hurt his knee on what looked like a pretty meaningless play. It wasn't as if, he blew out his knee, laid on the ground. It seemed like he tweaked it, went to the bench, actually played a little bit more. The Clippers are probably saying, man, if Kawhi was healthy, we'd be the favorite, which I think they would be. But,
Yeah, and I
you
keep
know,
I keep going back, Sap, to because this is how my brain works, to the Celtics, and that they were on
yeah,
the trajectory to last year and this year. These were the finals they were supposed to be in and winning.
yep,
Had they followed the trajectory that people were expecting out of them and had some sort of decent roster construction. And so I think if you're a Celtics fan, you look at it and go, look at these rosters that are remaining. We had a better
yep.
roster than this 2 years ago. We we
Oh, yeah.
we should we should be in this mix. Instead, they were bounced in 5 games in the first round. So it's opened up so well, and teams have taken advantage of it. The Bucks were able to get that last piece in Drew Holiday to take advantage of something opening up, and the Suns obviously were able to get that piece of Chris Paul to take advantage of things opening up. All the credit in the world goes to them versus Danny Ainge, who's now out
Yep.
of a job because he let this opportunity pass them by. So it's disappointing for me because I look at where the Celtics were at just a couple years ago and said they should be right in this and the favorites to win the finals had they just had competent roster construction. Because it's not
That's
like any of
why,
these teams are the Warriors from a couple
no,
years ago, Sap.
no, not even Brooklyn, because they faced injuries and they had chemistry issues, Brooklyn, because they didn't play together much. And you look at the Celtics, if they could have had a better roster this year, maybe they would have been a 4 or a 5 seed instead of a 7 seed. So they're playing Atlanta or the Knicks in the first round. They could have beaten them, and then they could have beaten Philadelphia, because Philadelphia doesn't appear ready to move on from anywhere beyond the second round. So yeah, the Celtics could have easily been playing in the Eastern Conference Finals if they had a better constructed roster, which that to me falls squarely on Danny Ainge. Obviously, Brad Stevens deserves a lot of the blame, and the players deserve a lot of the blame. That's why in the NBA, there's always this notion of, okay, let's plan for 3 years down the road. We've got this draft pick, we've got this. To me, just go for it on a yearly basis, because things open up. 2 years ago, things opened up for the Toronto Raptors. They went out before the season, got Kawhi Leonard. Things broke their way in the Eastern Conference and then finally in the finals, and they won a championship. How many opportunities did the Toronto Raptors get to get a player like Kawhi Leonard and go on and win a championship? You have to strike when things are hot. And I think that that's a mistake that Danny Ainge made here, constantly trying to build the perfect roster or trying to make sure he kept all of his assets. And in the end, it's like seeing the end of a tunnel and you keep looking at it, but you never get there. And that was the
Yeah.
case with the Celtics.
No, I completely agree, Sap. So I'm sitting here today, very frustrated that they're not in a position to be capturing their 18th championship because it wouldn't have been that difficult for them to just make a little minor tweaks to be in this position right now. Uh, and yet they're so far removed from this position. So it is
Yeah.
frustrating. But we do have game one of the Eastern Conference Finals tonight. You have the Bucks in 6 games.
Hmm.
I am going to say the Bucks in 5 games. I have a hard time seeing Atlanta win this series again. I don't think it's impossible, but they'd have to play just unbelievably outstanding basketball to be able to beat Milwaukee. So
Yep.
I'll say 5. And we both have the Bucks winning with and we're taking the 8 points as well. So that's going to do it for us today, Sap, here on the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage, and you can find more information about the show and other awesome basketball factoids and polls on both of our Twitter accounts at JohnSapp25, at Jet Stryer. The podcast is found wherever podcasts are. And if you haven't been watching the video version of this, it's youtube.com/Jet Stryer. So check that out. Leave a comment, like it. We appreciate that. We will talk to you tomorrow. We'll recap this game that happens tonight. We'll preview the next game in the Western Conference, and we'll talk about if any more coaches get hired, as the Celtics have opened the floodgates for that to happen with their new head coaching hire of Ime Udoka. We will be back tomorrow, everybody. See ya.